Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths, these badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession, this podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time, is proud to welcome our first sponsor, Ace Forensics. They are based near Chicago, and they've been building systems since 1983. Ace Forensics delivers high-performance digital forensics workstations, laptops, and servers to justice agencies across the United States and around the world. They offer unmatched value and the industry's only 5-year digital forensics warranty. Ace Forensics build the systems your digital forensics software deserves. If you're procuring digital forensics equipment, reach out to them for a competitive quote. Now, on to our episode. Welcome back to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. I'm Stacey Eldridge, and with me, as always, is my fabulous co-host, Becky Passmore. We focus on the digital evidence in today's modern crimes. Our focus is the facts and artifacts from digital evidence in these cases. And we're digging into what the digital forensic examiners are doing and saying. So, Becky, what are we digging into tonight?
So tonight, we are continuing our coverage of the first Karen Reed trial. In tonight's episode, we're headed into part 2 of the testimony of Jessica Hyde. So if you remember, she was called as an expert witness to discuss the digital evidence from Jennifer McCabe's iPhone. Part 1 of her testimony is in Season 1, Episode 43. So if you haven't listened to it yet, you might want to jump back and do that first.
And a quick 5-second summary about what she talked about in the first half of her testimony. She talked about those 2 main searches that she was brought in. And so she was focusing on how long to die in cold and how long to die in kickty. She gave us some overview of what an SQLite database is and a wall file and how they work together. She gave us that great analogy about a wall file. But she's really spending a lot of time kind of starting to lay the ground about what is the browser state.db and what is this 2:27 a.m. timestamp that shows up. And she's had one table up for people to look through that laid out some of that information as she laid out the timeline of different searches.
So we're going to jump right back in and discuss where now Hyde is called to then publish Table 2 from her report, which lists the locations that can potentially hold Safari data and what kind of data each location can hold. It helps the jury understand Table 1 by breaking down the type of data you could find in each artifact, such as whether it includes private or non-private searches and whether it includes closed tabs. So Table 2 is titled Description of the File That Store Safari-related data on iOS devices.
Yeah, so I think we'll just run through the table here. And again, we'll link to her report in our show notes if you want to go through and read this one. This one's actually pretty readable. But she notes that the history.db contains non-private searches, closed tabs, and the timestamp is the time that the user visited the site. Safari tabs.db contains both private and non-private tabs, but only shows tabs that have not been closed. It's essentially an active tabs database. And of course, browserstate.db, we've been talking about it a lot. It contains non-private searches, closed tabs, and shows a last viewed time. That's the name of the column. But that last viewed time column is about the tab itself, not the search or whatever website is listed in there. And she also noted that the name of a column in a database doesn't necessarily reflect its actual function. And then she finally also noted that com.apple.mobilesafari.plist records the time that something was queried, something was searched. Now, one of the things we want to stress here is, again, the name of the column is not necessarily indicative of what it means. We don't know why Apple names things the way they do. They don't
No.
there's no documentation of their source code
No.
out there for us to know the whys behind any of it. We
Mm-mm.
don't know why so many columns start with the letter Z and some of them have repeated Z's at the beginning of the column names, but they do. I don't know if it's a race to be the last column in the table or something. And so they're like, oh, there's Z, 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 Z. Let me just add a fifth Z and then I can be at the end. I don't know why. But something that's interesting to note with these column names is there's a difference between Cellebrite and Axiom here. Cellebrite will report the column name as it's reported in that native database, where Axiom does some of the interpretation for you when reporting that data from the database, and it's based on their research. And I think another key takeaway from all of this here is, you have to do your own testing. So, don't just take the tool for its word, especially when it's super important to your case. Make sure you know what that column name actually means, what the actual significance of it is, just not the name, because especially some of the names don't really make much sense anyway. So you're going to have to figure something out at some point.
That's right. So then the attorney asked Hyde to explain to the jury how SQLite databases relate to the WAL file. After giving that high-level overview, she was asked specifically about the interplay and complexities between the two. Hyde said one of the biggest incorrect assumptions people make is that because data exists in the WAL file, the user must have taken action to delete it. That assumption often stems from forensics tools marking the artifact as recovered and putting an X on it. She said it's more accurate to simply say the data was recovered. So the takeaway here is don't assume deleted. Don't jump to the word deleted as the default assumption. We know for a fact that the WAL has both new data that needs to be added to the live database and then data that's been marked also for removal.
She explained that to figure out whether the data in the WAL is waiting to be committed or deleted or removed, whatever you want to call it, is that you can make a copy of the database and then open it with a non-forensic tool. So that means you have to have both the database and the WAL file together in the same location. And then you can see what changes are actually made.
Yeah, for sure. Then came the big question from the attorney. Why is it your conclusion that those search terms were not deleted by the user? We have to remember that in Richard Green affidavit episode, we discussed how Green stated in his affidavit that the user had deleted this search. He also states that users can delete tabs. Hyde answers that from a functional perspective. There is no user deletion function for a tab. There was also no evidence that the search term was present prior to 24 a.m. So just remember, we talked about this in the last episode where neither Stacy or I were familiar with the ability to delete a tab or people saying they delete their tabs. What we stated previously matches the testimony Hyde gave in her open court.
Yep. And she continued talking about the tabs. The action of a tab being closed would not mean that the search was deleted, because that would show up in a different database, one that pertains to the actual searches in history, not one that just pertains to tabs. She stated it's possible that the tab was closed, but that is not the same thing as deletion. And then she continues on, and they have her publish figure 1 from her report. And this shows the 16 instances of the house long to die in cold search from the browser.state.db WAW file. And you can see in this figure, it's all the same search term with the same timestamp, identical UUIDs, and what it's doing is confirming a single search that was stored multiple times. And the title of that figure that she published was Instances of Google Search House Long to Die in Cold from browser.state.db. And I can tell from looking at this, and maybe I can't remember if she documented it or not, but this is coming from Sanderson's tool where she was looking at the browser.state.db in the WAW file. And this is just the artifacts limited strictly to that house long to die in search. So you can see the 16 instances of it that she spoke about earlier.
That's right. So now Hyde explained that browser.state.db doesn't track how many times something was searched. For that, you would look at mobile safari.plist and KnowledgeC.db. The 16 entries, which were presented in Figure 1, all had the same timestamp and were simply stored in the WAL file at multiple offsets.
Then the attorney asks another great question in my opinion.
Mhm.
He says, what conclusions was she able to reach about the time the website was actually viewed? And Hyde explained that the Apple WebKit timestamp shown in Figure 1, and she said that when it was decoded, it revealed a date and time of January 29th, 2022 at 2:27 a.m. Eastern, and her analysis ended there on that point. Now, it's unclear what the purpose of that question was, because if it was to explain based on her answer, it's unclear to me now, right? Because when I heard that question, I was getting ready to, I would have explained something else. But she goes on to explain, and maybe I wasn't clear when I summarized it, but she just explains that you see a long string of numbers, and it's actually an Apple WebKit timestamp. And when you convert it, you can see the actual time. And so she explains that, and it just kind of ends there, as you see, as we continue the discussion. So I don't know if he was asking her to explain that, or if she just started there and didn't get a finish with the rest of her opinion, because then he continues on with something else. So Becky, why don't you go into where they moved on next?
Yeah, so Hyde then moved into testing. To determine what the browser.state.db timestamp actually reflects, she conducted testing using a jailbroken iPhone so she could monitor data and storage in real time. She manipulated tabs, conducted Google searches, closed and moved tabs, and performed several different searches, all while following NIST guidelines for data set generation. Her testing was also peer reviewed.
And she was actually briefly stopped during the testimony for using the word we. And I hear a lot of examiners do it. We just talk about we.
Yeah.
So being asked about the word we, she was asked to clarify who else was involved. And that's where she explained that her work had been peer reviewed. But ultimately, through her testing, she explained that she was able to observe how the browser state changed when she interacted with the tabs, and when she was interacting with the tabs on a Mac using the same signed in Apple account. And she found that she could generate a timestamp in the browser.state.db that was earlier than the current time. And she was able to do that through a variety of means. And that included manipulating tabs, closing them and opening them, and switching the tabs, putting it in the foreground. She said even viewing that tab on a different device, like going from the iPhone and then viewing it on a Mac or an iPad, played a role in all of those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the attorney asked Hyde directly whether she observed any issues with Green's affidavit. She responded that Green drew a conclusion that a search occurred at 2:27 a.m. on January the 29th based on the artifact recovered from browser.state.db as parsed by Cellebrite, and that there were two errors with that assumption. The first error was treating the browser.state.db timestamp as the time of the search, when it is actually the time of the movement of the tab. The second error was concluding the data was deleted based on Cellebrite, marking it as recovered.
Now, the attorney asked for her overall conclusions based on the totality of her analysis and testing, right? So there's the open door. What do you want to say about all of this? So she went on and agreed with Green that the phone was actually in use at 2:27 a.m. and that's when those Hockomock sports searches were occurring. And that was at that time, and there was some browser activity that continued on past that. But she said she concluded that at 6:23 a.m., a search was initiated for how long so TI, and then at that point, Apple started suggesting how long to digest food. She said the user did not take that suggestion and instead completed the search as how long die in Kikti. And then a new search was later conducted at 6:24 a.m. And that 6:24 a.m. search was for how long to die in cold. And that became the last search made in that particular tab. And as for deletion, she said she found no evidence that any of those search term artifacts had been deleted.
Yeah. So on cross-examination, the defense attorney asked Hyde whether she had essentially concluded that the 2:27 a.m. timestamp was triggered by the closing of a tab. Hyde corrected him, clarifying that it is not a 2:27 timestamp on Google search. It is a timestamp on a tab.
And so the defense attorney basically is opening with, you're explaining to the jurors what is a really complex set of facts that led you to conclude that this 2:27 a.m. timestamp on the Google search was triggered by closing a tab. And did I essentially sum that up correctly? And she clarified, like Becky said, it is not a Google search timestamp. It's about a tab. And then the defense attorney reviews the different artifact sources that she's spoken about. And then the attorney asks, okay, this is where he's getting into it, right? He said, would you agree with me that another simple explanation for that 2:27 a.m. timestamp was that the user conducted the search at or before 2:27 a.m. on January 29th, 2022? Hyde answers again, that timestamp is not indicative of a time of search.
So then the attorney asks, what I'm saying is your analysis of the phone does not rule out that the user of the phone performed that Google search at or before 2:27 a.m. Hyde answers, there is no indication of a Google search at or before 2:27 a.m. So the defense attorney again says, I'm getting to whether you can rule that out, ma'am. That's really the crux of my question. Can you rule out that the user of the phone conducted that search at or before 2:27 a.m. on January the 29th? And Hyde answers, there is a very unlikely possibility based on the fact that there is no evidence that the search occurred before that time. And it's just like saying that the user searched for pandas at 2:27 a.m. Could you rule that out? I can't rule out something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, so this is what she's coming, that kind of line of questioning and what she was saying about like the pandas and I can't rule out something that doesn't exist. This line of questioning, it's one of those things. Is it strategy? Is the question phrased in such a way that it's so hard that you can't give a correct answer, or the question is so wrong, there's no correct answer to it, and what is the answer he wants ultimately? He probably wants the answer to be, yes, it's possible that the search happened at 2:27 a.m. or before, because, that was going to fit the defensive narrative. So that's why they're coming at that with that line of questioning. But to Hyde's point, it's really hard to rule out something that doesn't exist, right? And I think that goes back to, like, in the legal system, that's why the government has this burden of proof. They have to demonstrate that something happened. If you didn't do something, don't you think it's really hard to show evidence of not doing it, Becky.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that, again, this is the strategies from defense, the strategies from court testimony, is that the attorney is trying to get Hyde to agree with him
Yep.
instead of testifying to what she's tested, what she's validated, and what she has identified as the locations of this evidence. And that is why it's very important to go back and test and validate and confirm and then continue to repeat yourself, because he's trying to get her to agree with him, and
Yeah, he even phrases it with, "Wouldn't you agree with me?" You know? And
yeah. And I really appreciate Hyde's testimony. I think people can learn from that. You don't have to get aggressive. You don't have to get
Right.
combative. You don't have to get defensive. You have to do what she does and just repeat what she knows and repeat that what he's trying to get her to agree to is not accurate and true based on the evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It was, I think she was maybe a little frustrated because it's like, well, like we all would be, right? Like,
Sure.
how do I answer this question that is not phrased in any sort of way I could logically answer it with, of course, wouldn't you agree with me?
And how
Well,
many
is it?
times is he going to ask it to her in a different way and try to get a different result? And she's going to continue to give the same result and the same answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know, because she never did just go like, no, she did give some explanation every time they were kind of going down that line of questioning. And I don't know, eventually she switched and said, it's the thing about the pandas and I can't rule out something that doesn't exist. But if she wouldn't have went down that lane, how much longer would he have kept harping on that? And at some point, would her lawyer have objected, or would the judge finally said, let's move it along, right?
Right.
And we'll see some other instances of that sort of situation go on with the trial about like the question being kind of weird and the person testifying, like struggling to answer it. Because it's kind of like, what do you mean? And it's, I think anytime you talk about something super technical with someone who kind of knows some stuff about it, like enough to be dangerous, and they think they know this thing, and then they're trying to ask you about it, and you're just like, those are not the words I would use. What is your point? So that struggle is not like a rare thing, especially when it's not coming from your attorney, or it's coming on the cross, or it's coming on the redirect, because again, redirect, you can't exactly prepare for that, even though it's coming from your attorney, as much as you can on the direct.
That's right. So the defense attorney also questioned her about the limited scope of her examination. Hyde explained that Tully gave her a limited scope, asking her only to look at the extraction as it related to Safari search history on January the 29th, and any related artifacts showing the phone was in use at that time. She did not examine the call logs. There was no redirect from the prosecution after cross-examination.
So I think we've discussed a whole lot in this last episode about her testimony, and in this episode trying to break it all down and give you some learning points. But I think the key takeaway here, the thing to remember, is that just like Becky was just saying, she had a very limited scope. And it's not every case where you get to run wild and do whatever you want to and look at whatever you want to. You could be very narrow focused. And that's also in the amount of information that they feed you too, the stuff that they tell you about the case. Sometimes you get very little information going into it. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because they don't want you to be biased, but it's like, I need to know a little bit about whatever was happening so I can try to figure out if that did or did not happen, so I know where to look on the phone or the evidence for those things. But getting back to her testimony, so she was focused on those two searches, the house long to die in cold and the how long to die in kickty. And the artifacts related to that were that contain those trace evidence of those searches. And her conclusion ultimately was that search for house long to die in cold was not deleted. It was not a deleted search. It was not a deleted tab, because she said a user can't delete a tab either. And we had said that before a couple of episodes ago with regards to that remark in Green's affidavit. She, did say that that timestamp is present in that record in the browser state.db, but it doesn't reflect the date and the time of the search. And she said that at several different points in the testimony. So I think it's good to repeat that. So, that's good for the jury to hear your fact multiple times, because they're going to hear a lot of stuff. And this is not like a simple 2 or 3D trial. This goes on for a few weeks. So
Right.
I think that repetition's good to stress that, what that means,
Exactly.
especially when there's contention over it, because we know the contention is coming based on that affidavit. So she knows that. She knows she has a different opinion than Richard Green based on his affidavit and what she just said in the stand and what she wrote in her report. But so she's reiterating, the significance of that time and what the browser state.db is doing. And, I think she did a really good job doing that. And ultimately, she concluded that timestamp is related to the movement of the tab itself. Based on the second half of her testimony, Becky, anything else you want to dig into here?
I just think that reinforcing and discussing the fact that how important it is to test and validate all of this evidence so that you're accurate, so that when an attorney comes at you and says, wouldn't you agree with me? Then you state the facts. You state it right back to, that is not the location. That is not the evidence. That is not what is happening here. And you can be confident because you tested, you validated, you verified, you reviewed, you analyzed, and now you're communicating about it through testimony. So I think highlighting and emphasizing that for examiners to understand, it takes time. It takes more time to do those kind of things, but it gives you a lot more confidence to be able to talk about it on the stand.
Yeah, it's that double check. And if you're like me, maybe you look at it 3 or 4 or 5 times just to make sure, especially if it's like, in this case, they're disagreeing. So I would double check that multiple times.
Sure.
And I also feel like in almost every case I work, especially on iPhones and Androids, if this is super important to the case, I'm probably not having to do a whole entire testing and validation for that thing every time, but I am always jumping out and out of the forensic tool and looking at the raw data in a database viewer so I can see if it's being interpreted correctly by the tool. And another important thing is that it's not missing anything, right? Like, is there more in there that could add to the story that the tool did not report? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, but I always feel more comfortable matching those two things up. Again, that validation.
Yeah.
Do things line up?
Absolutely.
Or are
100%.
they different?
Yeah.
And then, of course, if they're different, now you've got to go and test and figure out, or maybe you make that call to the manufacturer and be like, hey, what's up with that?
Exactly. All right. So another great episode. Join us every week on Thursday as we continue to dive into Karen Reed's first trial.
Oh, and who do we have next week, Becky? Or who are we going to talk about next week?
Next week's testimony, we'll be talking about and covering the testimony of Ian Woofin. So really excited about that. So if you've enjoyed this episode, we're asking a favor. Can you share with your network? And as always, until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.